Hi everybody, my name is Scott Larson. I want to welcome you to this online training on follow-up, aftercare, and reentry of juvenile offenders. This is, of course, the toughest work. It's not the only work, but it's the toughest work. When you're in a facility, it's got its own challenges, but now when you're back in the community with a young person and life is back in full force as it was before, this is where things either fall apart or come together, and often you can't tell which one's happening. It seems like it's falling apart. It may be actually coming together. So I want to look at components of successful reentry. I have no control on whether somebody makes it or not, but I do have influence. And if I'm sticking to these things, I have the best shot to give young people the best shot at successful reentry. The first one, it really begins inside the facility. By definition, reentry starts 3 to 6 months before a person's released back into the community. It's critical because I there can establish a relationship with them. I can establish trust. We can begin to talk about, well, what is it you want when you get out? And it's going to be challenging enough when they come out. But perhaps the most important thing is that when they mess up, not if they mess up, but when they do, they feel they can call me. They don't need to, in shame, run away from me. That still may happen, but I want to establish as much as possible that my commitment is to them even more than it is to their success or the vision that they have for their lives. In this illustration of an hourglass, look at on the top part, the institutional side of it. These are all the many different programs that you might run in a juvenile facility. Bible discussion groups, chapel services, recovery groups, one-on-one mentoring, a myriad of other things, special events. All of that is just to have access to begin to form relationships with youth and for them to begin to think about life in possibilities rather than just despair as they're about to get released. And you'll notice that as it gets closer to release time, they begin to start to shut down and even get hardened, ready for what's going to be on the street. Because whatever in their mind rules were working to survive in the facility aren't going to work in the community. That's part of that really rough period of time and moving from one world to another. But engaging with them in a way that I can be a part of their life on the other side of the wall is critical. And I make it an hourglass because on the other side may be programs again like mentoring or community-based reentry or aftercare homes or any number of things. But this opens up the possibility as they really transform in the community. The impact goes wider and wider now that they can have on their own families, on other kids who are in the system, on their community. There's a lot at stake for these young people. And when they win, a lot of winning happens around them as well. But what are the necessary pieces then to make that transition? I like to use the image of a 3-legged stool because if I can strengthen 2 legs, the third leg, which is always going to be unstable, which is the youth, they're unstable. Generally, that's why they're there. It allows them to become stabilized in the presence of 2 strong legs. One is a stable adult. We are going to assume that that is going to always be the case. And in a juvenile facility, the location is also stable. Wednesday night at 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock, I'm going to be there. The institution's going to be there. Jimmy, who was there last week, may not come this week, but there will likely be kids there. And so that's a successful place, especially for volunteers and for people who are called in this, to begin to strengthen a youth. The challenge, of course, is now when he moves out into an unstable community, that's tough to keep going. And so how do I stabilize the place where I'm going to gather with them on the other side of the fence? Well, sometimes it's a place they have to go. Some places have reporting centers in the community. That's a stable location. Sometimes it's where they want to go, a basketball court. I'm going to hang out there. Sometimes it's, a program that's already running with job training, or a program that we run that they want. I have to have a place where I can connect to them. And part of this is finding a gang neutral site if I'm going to myself start something in the community. The best place to find that out is with the young people. Every time we go into a new community, I set a map out of the city, and I kind of explain where things are on that map, because kids a lot of times don't look at maps anymore, and tell me where the gang territories are. And inevitably, they're different than what the police have in their office, because it's always changing. It's different than what I may have perceived it to be. But finding a spot that's neutral, where everybody can come to without being in danger, is critical. Third, and this is very critical, is engaging the young people in the process, listening to what they say is needed. I may have an idea what's needed, but what do they say is needed? One of our staff years ago in a city near Boston, she got to know a number of these gang leaders in the community, and then did a pretty wild thing. She invited 12 rival gang members, gang leaders, to her home for breakfast, to her apartment. Everybody was a little nervous about that. I'm glad she didn't ask me. I may have said, I don't think you should do it. But she did it, and they showed up. They're not unused to coming together. They're together when they're locked up, but in the community to come together, they came to her apartment. And what they talked about was, what do you want to see in this city? And they didn't say, we want to expand our territory. We want these other, Crips, Bloods out of here. That's not what they said. They said safer parks, more jobs. 87% of gang members say they would like to get out if they could have a way out, which to them means being able to get a job and having safety. They said, we want safer streets so our grandmothers can go out at night and not be afraid. So our staff said, well, so what's something we can begin to work on together? And they came up with an idea to put basketball hoops back into the parks. Police had taken them out because of all the gang violence. They said now kids have nowhere to play. So they talked about it, and together they came up with a plan to meet with the mayor and explain to him that they would like to help and make sure that there's no violence in the parks if the city would put hoops back in. And he explains to them about all these thugs, and he doesn't really know he's talking to them as these gang members in his city. But they did it. And that was 12 years ago. There has not been a gang shooting, hasn't been a killing in a park in that city since. They own the process. They also said, we'd like to have our gangs come together for a basketball tournament. And that seemed a little outside the realm of possibility too. We found a place that was willing to let us use the space, and 72 rival gang members from 12 gangs came and played a basketball tournament for a day. They even mixed up the teams between them. When they own a part of the process, things happen differently. I'm invited from time to time into communities where police, clergy, business people, concerned citizens come together because there's been a spike in gang violence. And before I'll come to be a part of it, I always say, what gang members are you going to invite? You mean former gang members? No, real ones. Well, why would we invite them? That's who because it's their community too. And you'll be surprised at the solutions that they may be open to or even be able to create. I have yet to have a place take me up on that, by the way. But every time I have seen it happen, which is where we go into communities, things happen for the good. That particular city I mentioned to you earlier went from being the second most violent in our state to not even in the top 10 anymore. And it's because the participants, the problems, were brought to the table and became part of the solution. Another thing we did in that city was we began to meet with the rival gangs that were locked down in gang blocks and talk to them about coming together. And the administration surprisingly allowed it. We had 32 rival gang members, 16 Blood, 16 Crip. We came together for a 3-day program we called Ready for Life. And they reconciled. They were all from the same community. And when we finished, that last day, it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The next Friday, we would have basketball at one of the courts in the city. Bloods one week, Crips the next, et cetera, et cetera. That Friday, both groups came together, and we thought, this is not good. And they said, no, all the pieces have been navigated from the inside. That's what can happen when you bring people into the process and not have them as just problems on the outside. Next component of successful reentry is providing opportunities to serve. Nobody likes to be the mission field. Nobody wants to be the helped one. Nobody wants to be the project that somebody's trying to fix. No, we don't respond to that. Of course not. But when there's opportunities to serve, to make a difference, that's when people really change. One of our staff, a young woman who was one of the worst in the juvenile system in Massachusetts, is now on our staff and gets the call for others, girls who are the worst in the system now, and can you work with them? And her whole program is engaging kids to serve. They spend all day Thursday shopping for groceries, to do a hot meal on Friday morning, and to go out and serve the homeless. Now the homeless are served, and that's a powerful thing, but even more powerful are the youth who are doing the serving. We heal when we serve. It's more blessed to give than to receive. And so why withhold the blessing to these kids? See them as real solutions in the community. Next one I would say is that we've got to be connected to the resources that are already in our communities. Jobs, education, counseling, bus passes, churches, all kinds of resources are already there. We don't need to recreate all of them. The point is, though, that most of our young people haven't accessed them, or maybe they've been kicked out of them. They just are not accessing these resources in the community. And it's because they don't have a relationship with most of them. And so our job is to form relationship with a young person around a vision that the young person has for their life. It's too volatile sometimes, just the relationship, but if my commitment to you is not just to you, but to your vision, now what resources are there in our community that could be a resource to you? Maybe they want to be an auto mechanic, have their own body shop or something like that. And so a step in a resource toward that might be my first job, and my first job might be McDonald's. Well, I don't want to work at McDonald's. I want to be a mechanic. Okay, but you know that more millionaires worked at McDonald's than any other corporation in America? That may be just the resource that gets you started to the next thing. And I get them connected into there, or into the high set or the GED program, or into counseling. And because I have a relationship with this young person, I can transfer that relationship to somebody in this other place. It means I'm going to need to go with them a few times before it begins to take shape. And over time, they're connected with all kinds of positive people that are in that community. I mentioned churches. I've known for many years that people coming out of jail need the church in order to thrive. I'm more and more convinced of just how much the church needs people coming out of jail to thrive. And it's not by holding them in a separate group, it's enfolding them into the church, but usually not through the youth group. That often creates a lot of difficulty when the girls tend to like the bad boys and their life experiences are very different. Now, instead, how do I invite this young person to serve in the church? That's how you get them there. Not putting up a sign, welcome, or calling them saying, we've got a speaker talking on dysfunctional families this week. I thought of you right away. That's not going to bring anybody. But can you help me set up? I'd like to get together to think with you about how we reach kids that are on the street who don't come anywhere near here. Giving them an opportunity to serve in the church and to serve alongside people in the church. Maybe when they go out and feed the homeless as a church, these kids will be an expert to be able to help in how to communicate out there on the streets. I mentioned listening to participants about what they say is needed. Actually, 94% of returning citizens, people coming out of lockup, when asked what you think you need to make it successfully, 94% say a job. And it's true enough. You need a job. What's interesting, though, is that when you talk to people who have successfully transitioned, in other words, they've been out at least a year without coming back, and you say, what contributed to you making it? 64% of them say having a positive relationship with friends and family in the community. You can get a kid a job, but if he doesn't have a structure around him, another more positive peer group, he won't keep the job because it goes in contrast to his friends, the gang, whatever it is, all the other things that are meeting his needs for belonging and mastery and independence and generosity. So I've got to really work to strengthen relationships around this young person. And if it's a kid coming out of juvenile jail, that involves his family. And we know that every system is designed to get the results it's getting. Community systems operate by knowing who the bad people are. And a kid coming out is one of those bad people. He's not going to all of a sudden, just because he prayed a prayer to receive Jesus, he's not going to all of a sudden have the police out there shaking his hand and congratulating him. No, when something goes down, they assume it's him. Same thing with the family. He's actually played a role in that family system for a long time. And generally it's the role of the scapegoat, we call it, the bad kid. And because we have a bad kid, we can blame everything onto this person and allow somebody else to be the good kid and somebody else to be the funny kid or the overachiever. And the system is balanced. Now, when this scapegoat, bad kid, accepts Jesus and he starts to change, it actually throws the whole system off. And now blame starts to go other places too, and people don't like it. It doesn't feel familiar. And we'd rather be able to predict the way the world's going to work and who people are than sometimes even have our worlds work better. Notice when you go home for holidays to your family of origin, how you so naturally step into the same role that you were when you were 12. And if you start to be different than that, people don't really like it. It's evidenced by the fact that the number one person to smuggle in alcohol or drugs to a man in rehab is his wife. It's not his co-workers, his fellow partiers. It's his wife. The one who actually finally left him because of his drinking, that put the stake in the ground and got him into that. But now, as he's starting to shift and sober, it's throwing the whole family system off. He's got opinions about how we spend the money and how we raise the kids. And she's like, well, where you been for the last 25 years? I liked you better when you were a drunk. And there's this subtle pressure to get him back to where he was before so everybody else knows how life works here. And this is a real challenge because somebody coming out of lockup, going back into the same system in the community and family, knows what to do with him or her as the bad kid. They don't know what to do with them as the good kid. And I've found too that even the way the laws are set up is to keep them as the bad kid. We'll get kids jobs oftentimes, and they'll be at work and then their random color comes up, which means that they've got to go and urinate in a cup for a drug test. Well, what if they're at work and it's 11 o'clock in the morning? What are they going to do? Leave work and lose their job, or stay at work and then be AWOL and be brought back in? The system assumes that this kid's not going to be doing well. And so our work is oftentimes to pave the way for that as much as possible. Create relational connections with probation officers and employers and folks that are in the community and say, hey, we will stand with this kid if you'll hire him. We'll even raise the money to pay him for the first 3 months, which is what we do. If you'll take a risk on hiring him, and if he doesn't show up, call us. Don't just give up on him. Most employers want to make a difference. They want to help, but they're not going to lose money in their business to do it. We've got to navigate this territory. We've got to work to strengthen relationships that are key in that community if our young people are going to really make it. Well, the final component of successful youth reentry is that we're empowering and not enabling. We've been saying that all the way through, not doing it for people, but doing it with them, making a way for them to do the work. Bob Lupton wrote a wonderful book called Toxic Charity some years ago, and in it, he lays out what he calls the oath for compassionate service, sort of like the Hippocratic oath that medical professionals take. And just look at these with me. First one, never do for the disadvantaged what they have or could have the capacity to do for themselves. Teach a man to fish. Don't do for them what they can do for themselves. Otherwise, we set up enabling. 2, limit one-way giving to emergency situations. Sometimes there are emergency situations. Certainly they all feel like it. The family is in need, everybody's in need, they're going to shut off my phone, this, that. But the book, When Helping Hurts, talks about there's different kinds of engagement. There's relief, there's rehabilitation, and there's development. Relief is what comes after a tragic event, a hurricane, a fire, etc., etc. But most aid is given as relief, even when it's not what's most needed. Usually what's needed most is rehabilitation, the development of people. 3rd, strive to empower through employment, lending, and investing, and use grants sparingly to reinforce achievements. I think that's self-explanatory. Number 4, subordinate my own self-interest to the needs of those being served. Somebody asked me a question some years ago, do you need a ministry more than God needs another minister? That was an interruptive question. I don't know the answer. Sometimes I wonder. We've got our own self-interest, and sometimes our interest is, I need to save this kid in some way. And it actually keeps them from stepping in to real salvation. Number 5, listen closely to those you seek to help, especially to what's not being said, for unspoken feelings often contain essential clues to effective service. And lastly, above all else, do no harm. Well, this is a very complex and necessary component of juvenile justice ministry. Effective aftercare, follow-up, reentry, work on the outside. I'm so glad that you're interested in it. I know that you've already stepped into it long before this. We want to be of service to you in any way we can, and that's why we're here at the Institute for Juvenile Justice Ministries. You can contact us at enrollment@ijjm.org. We're a ministry of Straight Ahead Ministries, and the movement is to bring every youth who's in every facility the good news of Jesus Christ.